Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude BeyondMystic, and welcome to this special report entitled The Death of the Petrodollar with the silver guru himself, Mr. David Morgan. He is, of course, the author of the Silver Manifesto. You can find that at thesilvermanifesto.com. You can find his work at themorganreport.com and also here on YouTube at The Morgan Report. Let's give him a big, warm welcome back to the show, Mr. David Morgan. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Jean-Claude.
So how are things with you?
Well, like the silver market and the gold market, up and down.
Right.
And I have to give you my standard line. I'm doing as well as could be expected under the circumstances. And I think you know what that means.
Absolutely. Oh my God. Well, thank you so much for joining me, David, here for this show. And I do apologize to the audience here. We had a little bit of a snafu. I guess there's another imposter out there. And David and I were trying to figure that out. And it's funny. I just did this video last night about this imposter pretending to be me, sending people towards crypto investments on our channel. So anyways, that explains the little snafu here today. Of course, these are live interactive shows. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today and bearing with us as we try to work out these little kinks in our schedule. David, I wanted to get you on here on this particular series here, The Death of the Petrodollar. I was absolutely dumbfounded by the fact last week that the mainstream media was really not doing its job here, connecting to the dots with this particular article. Of course, this is where the Saudis have made an agreement now with the Russian military, and we are left with extrapolating maybe what that agreement is and how maybe perhaps it is replacing the one that was done 50 years ago here with Kissinger and Nixon. Before I start that, I thought we would go down memory lane here a little bit and give the audience a taste of what it was to be a tinfoil hatter and a conspiracy theorist back in 1960, in the previous decade before this famous Nixon moment. And I want to play that clip because there's a lot of us out there who are getting the flack for being maybe crying wolf and talking about this reset of the dollar and the death of the dollar and what's going to happen to gold and silver. And apparently it never happens. And we're all these tinfoil hatters. So I wanted to bring up a famous tinfoil hatter on this particular subject. It's a 2-minute clip. Let's play that, and then we'll start this conversation, David.
Le fait que beaucoup d'États acceptent par principe des dollars au même titre que de l'or pour les règlements des différences qui existent à leur profit dans la balance des paiements américaine, ce fait entraîne les Américains à s'endetter et à s'endetter gratuitement vis-à-vis de l'étranger, car ce qu'ils lui doivent, ils le lui payent, tout au moins en partie, avec des dollars qu'il ne tient qu'à eux d'émettre.
So essentially, what he's saying here is these guys are enriching themselves debt-free, and all they have to do is print money and pretend that it has value to it and that it's attached to gold. And of course, while he was saying that in the 60s, the American government was saying, oh, come on, he's just a conspiracy theory. Absolutely not true. There's all this gold reserve here at Fort Knox, and we would never do that. We were absolutely honest here in our banking system. And then, of course, we had that Nixon moment. So let's start there, David. How do you tie this all in with this 50th anniversary here, and how can you share your thoughts on maybe Charles de Gaulle's feeling of being a contrarian or a tinfoil hatter with the work that you've been doing for all of these decades here as well?
Well, that's quite a mouthful. Charles de Gaulle's economist was Jacques Ruff, and he, taught de Gaulle exactly what was happening. He articulated it perfectly. Basically, the U.S. is cheating everybody. So if your paper dollars are as good as gold, I'm calling the contract on you. Here's your paper, give me the gold. And of course, that forced Nixon to admit that they had printed more paper than they had gold to back it. And of course, he blamed it on the speculators, which was a total lie. And then I want to pause here and digress for a moment. There are a lot of people out in the audience saying, gold hasn't done anything, and I've been waiting. And Jean-Claude and David and Cliff and all these people have been saying this for years. They're wrong, wrong, wrong. Well, the actual truth of the matter is From the bottom of the market at 252 ounces, 252 U.S. Federal Reserve notes per ounce to today around, we'll call it 1,800. Gold has a compounded annual growth rate. That's a compounded annual growth rate of 10%, which is in line with the actual inflation rate produced by shadowstats.com, my friend John Williams, of 9%. So if gold is there to preserve your wealth, not make you wealthy, but keep you level with whatever distortions there are in the economy, I want everybody on this show to know right from the get-go that it's done its job. Now, I may be as guilty as anyone about talking about the explosion or the big move. Has gold's price in paper dollars caught up to the massive amount of printing that's taken place in the last several years, especially this last 18 months? And the answer is no, it has not. And if that were to occur, the price of 5,000 is probably too low. 10,000 is probably about the bottom of it. I mean, if you do the amount of paper versus the amount of gold, and you divide that number, it's about as basic arithmetic as you can get. You get the amount of M1, which is the amount of purported paper dollars, and you look at the gold supply, which is 265 million ounces, and you do that little bit of division, and you'll come out in the like $15,000 per ounce range. So there's that. But as far as the truth of the matter is, gold has maintained your purchasing power. So let's move on. So now back to the petrodollar and why this is so important. First of all, what I don't think too many people know, and it cannot be proven, but I'll do my best to at least build a strong case for it, is what happened at the birth of the petrodollar. If you go back, and I suggest that the audience look up the movie Rollover in their, in a search engine. It's on. There's clips of it on YouTube. I think you can watch it on YouTube. I'm not too fond of one of the actresses in there, but get beyond that, and that's just my take. But the theme of the movie is that the Arabs, the Saudis, are not accepting dollars for oil. They're accepting gold only. And even though that was a fictional movie, that was pretty much the truth of the matter. The Saudis weren't trusting gold, even though the dollar at the time was more or less backed by gold. They were like, well, let's just circumvent this. They weren't cashing their dollars in for gold. They're just saying, let's pay us in gold directly. And of course, the U.S. couldn't. And then they had to admit, due to de Gaulle coming with his ships to load it up, and then Great Britain saying, give us the gold, which I have to shout out to Ronan Manley for his article on that, because I didn't know about that. And I've never claimed to know everything. So it's always great to get more information. So now the Saudis are, we're getting this paper for oil. And oil is the most important commodity on the planet by far, much more than silver or gold. So the U.S., under Kissinger's idea, primarily, at least he's attributed to have the idea, said, look, you've got to accept our paper, but if you accept our paper, here's what we'll do. We will protect you. It's protection money. So what we need you to do is to make sure that you only accept U.S. dollars as payment in oil. And if you do that, we will have our army at your beck and call. We will be there. We'll put bases in. We will be your protectors, and then nothing can happen to your oil fields. We're there, and basically it's protection money. And they said yes. And that was the birth of the petrodollar. And it's been that way now for a very, very long time. So it really went from we want gold to being talked into, okay, we'll take your paper. Now, this really, really helped the United States. And the reason was that so much money was flowing into Saudi Arabia, they really didn't know what to do with it all. I mean, you can only have so many, silver-plated Audis and, jets and hotels, and you can only go to Vegas so many times. And I mean, so, putting that money into gold would be, really putting some price pressure on the gold market at the time. Mm-hmm. But now what did they do? Well, now it's all U.S. dollars. They started buying treasuries, which really helped the, let's say, paper problem in the United States for decades, because all of this excess cash went right into the debt markets. We'll buy, we'll get a bond, we'll get a yield. We'll buy, the 10-year or the 30-year, the long bond or whatever. So all that dollars got recycled back into the U.S. or back into the sovereign debt of the United States. So it's a huge boon to the United States to basically continue the game that de Gaulle had warned about. And the Saudis got talked into it. And I'm not saying they made a bad decision. I'm just giving you the history. So there's that part of it, I think, that a lot of people don't really know, that we were really at a cat's whisker, as the expression goes, of being called, or being the bluff of the United States being called out totally. No, it's not just the French and the Brits that want gold for dollars. It's Saudis want gold also, and you guys don't have it. And, of course, if you think it through, it would have basically brought down the entire system, because the whole system runs on oil. It doesn't run on money and finance and trading options. It runs on energy. And for the most part, that means oil. And if you don't have an oil supply, and the people that produced the most of it at the time in agreement one way or another, you've really got a problem. Of course, they know that too. I mean, they're shooting themselves in the foot if they stopped, of course. So I think I've beaten that up enough for people to get a clearer picture of what really went on during that time frame.
Okay, I love it. And one thing that's important for the audience to notice here too is that when we had this Nixon moment, of course, he was only temporarily moving us off the gold standard. Here we are 50 years later. And doesn't that sound familiar? Whereas in 2008, we went to zero bound temporary for emergency measures, and here we are in 2021, and still the Fed is talking about whether or not they can taper. So again, history repeats itself, but this is why we're doing these shows. And thank you for the audience members here bearing with us as we maybe replay things that we've already played on the previous channel. But as you know, as you try to tell the truth here on YouTube, sometimes your videos and your channels get deleted, so it's important to kind of bring that back on to the scene for everyone. So hopefully you guys understand what we're talking about here. Now, going back to what you just said here, this deal of Kissinger and Nixon with the Saudis in terms of protection, perhaps this is the clincher moment here in the last couple of weeks. Of course, we've seen this complete debacle, or what some would call a shit show here in Afghanistan. Was that the signaling maybe for the Saudis that their protector had no more capability of protecting the realm? And was that the pivotal point for them here, the loss of Kabul and the pursuant shit show here, that maybe forced them to move towards Russia? Or was there something else maybe in the last couple of years, David, that were giving them indications here that maybe the world, even without this current shit show, were in fact on this road for de-dollarization, and that it was accelerating? So they perhaps knew that the writing was on the wall. What are your thoughts here on all of this timing and how that ties in together here for the audience?
Jean-Claude, I think it's the latter. I think that they saw it coming, but you could say that this Afghanistan move is metaphorically the pivot point where they come out. I mean, bin Salman was pretty clear with his tweet about talking to Russia about having them basically, I'll use my term again, as protection money. And but they'd seen it coming. It wasn't a big surprise in my opinion. Now, I'm not the best on geopolitics. Obviously, I have to study it. As Greg Hunter says, anyone that's in the gold market that's serious about it has to look at all the puzzle pieces to put it together, and I certainly do, but I wouldn't consider myself to be the most astute on Middle East politics. But nonetheless, I have a pretty, I have enough of a working knowledge to make some, accurate calls. If you dig deep, I'm not the guy to talk to.
Okay, very good. Now, let's bring up this tweet you brought up on August 25th. You were retweeting the Zero Hedge article here where Gunlock was basically outlining for us a roadmap to losing the global reserve currency. Now, I think that a lot of members here would look to you a little bit more highly than what you've just said about yourself here. You have quite a bit of understanding of geopolitics and how this all ties in, of course, to gold and silver. But let's maybe describe this for the audience here. How do you perceive this roadmap to losing the world reserve currency? Where did that really start in earnest for you? I know you wrote the book, The Silver Manifesto, and that is a big tie-in here to maybe the last 2 decades of how our financial systems are really at the end of their rope here, and and we'll get into in the second part of the show here where we're going after this, but talk about this roadmap to losing the gold reserve currency and the world reserve currency and what that means here for the audience.
Certainly. First, I'll shout out to the detractors and the trolls. I will admit that based on my studies and previous history, I did not think it would take as long as it's taken for the dollar to classically fail. And what does classically fail means? It's not a function of how much they printed. It's not a function of what the yield rate is. All these things are important and they play into it. But it's all based on psychology, really, and it's faith. It's a con game. It's all about confidence in the dollar. So if there's confidence in the dollar, then the con can continue. And the con continues longer than I expected it to because it's the best of the bad, meaning that if you are in a hyperinflation in Argentina or Venezuela or Turkey or any of these countries, they actually use physical pieces of paper called Federal Reserve notes to transact. And there's a black market for them in all of those countries because they're the most trusted by the people. So there's a great deal of confidence in that piece of paper in those countries that maybe you and I don't have, we're in the States. But nonetheless, it's a global reserve currency. Everybody uses it as the money of last resort. And this is pointed out by probably none better than John Exter, Federal Reserve banker, Bank of New York, so many years ago. And you can look this up. Many of your viewers know this already. I've used it many times, the Exter pyramid, which is a liquidity pyramid. And it's an upside down pyramid showing the worst of the worst kind of debts at the top. And you scroll down into the most trusted name in electronics. I'm being funny. The most trusted currency available. And that is a physical piece of paper that says Federal Reserve note until that confidence is lost. Mm-hmm. And once that confidence is lost, you go from paper money to gold. So when people say, well, the dollar's rising and so is gold, or, the dollar's still strong relative to other currencies in the world and all these things here, absolutely true. And I agree with it. And that's the way I expect it to go. Where I was wrong is the time frame, and no one gets the time frame right 100% of the time. Even our friend Cliff High, as accurate as he's been, has been off, timing wise. It's very difficult to say at what point does the psychology of that last person take place, and it's not a majority. I mean, JeanClaude, you're studied enough and smart enough to know that it's maybe 1% of the population wakes up and quits trusting the dollar, and then it cascades into, a great deal more people, but it isn't like 51% have to wake up and say the dollar's a worthless piece of paper. That's not how it works.
Right. Okay, very good. And you're in good company. So not only you were wrong on the timing, but even in this particular series here, and I recommend the audience go check it out if they haven't already, The Hidden Secrets of Money. It was a really good production. And in there too, he talked about all of these nails on the coffin of the US dollar and everything that was happening in our accelerated clip, but none of us would think that it would last this long. But of course, when the whole world system is being held up by this, you can imagine the lengths to which these people would go to hold up the system. And I guess our wildest dreams could not have anticipated what's been done to our monetary supply and our policy here in the last decade or so to keep this dead man walking. Now, for the audience members here too, please go check out this last interview that Greg Hunter did here with David Morgan. So I'll put the link down in the live chat if you haven't seen that. It'll give you a little bit more context here to this conversation here and what's happening also at the federal level. Do you want to maybe take the next 2 minutes here, Dave, and also talk about the Federal Reserve now and the impossible situation they find themselves in, that whole question of taper or not to taper in the context of the whole world now, de-dollarization, and how that is absolutely coming now to a critical point?
Sure. So I think the extra pyramids are probably a good place to reiterate. So what happens in a liquidity squeeze is trust starts to break down. So now there's people that used to buy the 30-year debt instrument or the 10-year or the T-note, 3 months. And they start trust. So if you don't trust a dollar's value tomorrow, why would you trust it 3 months from now or 6 months from now or 10 years from now? And the answer is you wouldn't. But there's a lot of bond players out there that are betting on an interest rate move up or down. And that's where these massive amounts of derivatives revolve around. Of this quadrillion notional value of derivatives, most all of it has to do with interest rates. Interest rates on sovereign debts, swaps against, what the yen will do versus the dollar, or the euro versus the Aussie dollar, or the Canadian dollar, and on and on. I could list thousands of them. But the idea is that they're very illiquid, and when things go wrong, someone's going to default. They're not going to be able to pay, which is exactly what happened in 2008. Except from 2008 till now, all we've done, all the system has done, all the elite bankers have done is papered over, made the problem worse, not better. Right. We had an opportunity to let banks fail that needed to fail. If you make a bad loan on a personal basis, I mean, JeanClaude is a quick example. I hope you don't mind using you, but you loan $5,000 to your uncle and he never pays you back, you lost the $5,000. That's the way it works. It's the same thing in the banking system or the debt markets. I mean, if you make a bad mortgage or a bad car loan or a bad home loan or a bad business loan, or even a bad loan to a government that won't pay, like Argentina, that happens about every decade, one side defaults or pays you back 10 cents on the dollar or 5 cents on the dollar or 25 cents on the dollar or whatever. But this isn't allowed to happen in our system, which is not the way the system was set up. The system was set up, you have the right to succeed or the right to fail. If you make a bad decision, a bad business deal, a bad loan, and your decision was incorrect, you had to pay the price. But that's not the way it works. The banks come in and rescue the other banks and blah, 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 too big to fail and all this crap that we hear all the time. So we are, again, at that point, only it's, as I said, bigger. So there will be people running to what they trust. If they don't trust the bonds, then what do they trust? The stocks? Well, the bonds and stocks are highly correlated now. If you go back 4 decades, you go back about 40 years or so. I mean, I'm not going to split hairs on the number. You could argue with, is that the right decade? But they were uncorrelated. So you would have stocks that had some risk, but bonds would balance that risk. Not true anymore. They're very correlated. Bonds do not prevent you from a stock market crash and vice versa. Stocks won't help you if there's a bond crash, or bonds will help you if there's a stock crash. That's not going to take place. Right. So we are where more and more people are starting to move into the exit. So they're tiptoeing through the door to get out. And what are they getting into? Well, look at central banks. What are central banks purchasing? Gold. Remember, gold is God with an L in it. There's a reason that central banks buy gold, because they know it's the ultimate money of last resort. They might not have ever seen the extra pyramid, although I bet most of them have, but they understand it, but they keep their mouths shut. They actually, many of them kind of poo-poo it in the mainstream financial press, but they still buy more. Mm-hmm. So gold is the monetary hitching post of the universe. I mean, it's eternal. It's not like Bitcoin, and I'm not anti-Bitcoin and free market. Buy Bitcoin till it's 5 million a coin. I don't care. What I'm saying is it's ethereal. You've got to have a system to provide it. You've got to have a computer system. You got to have electricity. You got to burn oil somewhere, that kind of thing. Whereas gold, gold coin found from the Roman Empire, still a gold coin, right? Right. So that's why it's the monetary hitching post of the universe. It's supposedly rare. I mean, I'm not going to tangent off into what Bix thinks about gold, although I'm starting to agree with him more. But regardless, that's the standard. Plus, the bankers back in the late 1800s, 1873 to be exact, basically said, he who owns the gold makes the rules. Gold only is money, not silver. And that's the way things are going to be from now on. And they really hurt the entrepreneurial spirit of the U.S. people and others. It hurt other countries by going off of silver. And of course, that lasted a few years. They kind of subtly came back to it. But gold was the official money from then on.
Right.
So I'm not sure I answered the question. Give me some feedback if I didn't quite hit it.
Well, you did, because we're talking about this timeline here of de-dollarization and the death of the dollar and those nails in the coffin. We just talked about a few things here, but in going back to what you just said about supply and the timing here, he recaptured your tweet and he says, yeah, the silver guru is correct. My thinking as the reserve currency status will be gone by March 2022. So that's what he's seeing in his forecast. But he says here, the most big damage meltdown should happen this October and November. And it's funny because in his past Alta reports, I believe it was 2017 or 18, in one of the Bare Naked Wealth reports, he had predicted at that time that Bitcoin would reach $64,000, that when it would reach it, it would retrench maybe by half. We've already seen that this year now. So we're temporarily off by a few years, but those markers are now hitting us fast and furious. And in that same report, he had $600 silver before Christmas. And so looking at the timeline here and the death of the petrodollar, what happens now? If in fact the Saudis have basically reneged on the deal with the Americans and they're asking now for protection from the Russians, is it perhaps also that they are going to start selling their oil for other denominations, maybe the ruble, maybe the Chinese yuan? What does that do to accelerate here on the roadmap to losing that world reserve currency? How do you see that playing out if you were to guess here moving forward in the next couple of weeks and months?
I'll use the word guess and I'll take ownership of it. I'll say me. So it's my opinion and it's a guess. I think that's it. I think this is the tipping point. I really do. And I think it's one of the reasons you're not really seeing it in the mainstream. I think it's why you're providing such a great service to your viewers, because we want to be a step ahead. I mean, I know this is overdone. I know the trolls will get, oh, David, so go, oh, David, I'll type it in for you. You can add to it. But I'd rather be, 6 months too early than 6 minutes too late. And let me come back to the analogy I was giving a minute ago. What I was saying, I didn't quite finish because I asked for your feedback. So the people are starting to slip out the exit now. They're tiptoeing through the door and they're not buying the bonds. They're exiting the stock market and they're going into precious metals primarily.
Yeah.
And they're doing it very stealthily. They're not making any noise. And now what happens is people start to walk through the door doing the same thing. Then there's a jog through the door. Then there's a run to the door. Then there's a panic to get through the door and you can't. Mm-hmm. And that's what Mike Maloney talks about, unobtainium. Now, I'm not saying I'm totally in agreement with Mike that you won't be able to buy it at any price, but I can see, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but the idea is correct. There's going to be so much demand that there'll be very much difficulty in filling orders, especially big orders, in a timely manner.
Mm-hmm.
And we could get to a point, and I do believe this will happen. I'm going to make an educated guess that there'll be a gap where, and it doesn't matter what the number is, but there'll be that unobtainium where I'll use silver. It's probably easier to think about than gold. So silver goes to 75 and no one wants to sell. I've gutted this out for so long and it's worth a hell of a lot more than 75 to me. So it gaps to 100. So there's a $25 gap before anybody wants to give up any silver in size. Now, of course, that wouldn't apply to the mining contract. Some of these miners, they're on contract. They can't renew on a contract or they're going to get sued. And there's all that I understand. It's in the market and That's going to take place. But remember, all markets move on the margins, which means that only 25% of the world's silver supply comes from primary silver miners. So if the refiners shut down or the people that are holding silver as an investment don't make up that gap, where's it going to come from? So all these guys, all these primary silver miners that may say, oh man, I wish I never had a contract with Mitsubishi that they get my entire silver supply at, spot plus 10 cents. I wish I didn't sign that contract now. Tough.
Right.
But so that's just a metaphor. It's an analogy. It's an idea that when we get into what I see coming, let me take a deep breath. There's going to be those moments where I don't think we've ever seen them before. People are going to they're going to learn an economic lesson, just like the Great Depression, that put into the consciousness of that generation something that most couldn't shake out for the rest of their lives. And I say that with authority because it affected my own mother that way. Mm-hmm. My mother could have been on the Hoarders show. The depression scarred her so much, she wouldn't throw out a rubber band that came on the newspaper. Mm-hmm. You know, so God bless her, but I love her. But nothing went to waste. It could be used later. You know, use it up and this is what I think will happen again. It'll be different. You know, I'm on a tangent. You can reel me back in. You've got the food issue, and we got the energy issue, and we got the trust issue, the confidence issue, and all those are converging in the most corrupt system that's ever existed. I mean, I think Rome looks like a good place to be at the end versus what we're seeing here. And it was pretty nasty at the end of the Roman Empire. So,
well, I agree with you there. I mean, I think humanity as a collective, we're being put through a trial that, although we've seen snippets of in our history, never before has everything happened at the same time around the planet at the same time. So we've seen these currencies fall before, but they were one country, one region at a time. Now this is global. And again, it's happening, as you're saying, in an environment where we're losing confidence in everything, our governance structures or religious structures or institutional schooling, educational structures. It's absolutely incredible, the cognitive load that is placed upon us right now as humans who are trying to decode this reality. For those who are still asleep, maybe ignorance is bliss, but at a certain point, the rubber hits the road. And I think that's what you're talking about, that shock that is going to hit everyone. And I always encourage people who are watching the show, be compassionate. It won't be time for the aha, I told you so, and aha, David Morgan told you so, you know, a few decades ago. No, it'll be, no, we have to work together through this here because we're moving into this whole new era. We can get into the age of Aquarius maybe on another show, but I wanted to bring this up. You mentioned earlier that the banks, of course, were buying gold here at a very, very rapid clip. I had Andy Sheckman on the line a couple of times, and this was our interview with John Williams, where we were talking about the inflation and this move that these central banks and other sovereign wealth funds were also into the mix here, removing the physical at a very, very fast clip, like maybe never before. So I want you to speak to that from your understanding and what you're hearing from your industry sources. And I also want you to explain what Andy was talking about here was that great flippening that happened maybe in the last year, whereas before we saw most of the demand for silver coming from the industrial side, and now suddenly that's flipped over to the investment side. How did that impact, or how will that impact here the timeline towards not just the death of the dollar, but the realization here that silver at 20 some bucks an ounce here today is an absolute farce, to say it that way?
Well, on the bank thing, I think we spoke enough about it. I don't have the numbers in front of me, Jean-Claude, but the idea is sound that the banking system has accelerated their gold purchases, particular countries, Brazil being one of them. And they use it because they know it's a money of last resort, and it's a way for them to have sovereign wealth. They've got gold. All banks trust it. In fact, if you go back into, I guess it'd be 15 or 20 years ago now, the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, known as the Bankers Bank, they only account for gold. If you report to them on your balance sheet what you look at the end of the year, it's not how much foreign currency exchange you've got, it's how much gold you have. And I'm going to digress from there and make the point, because in that movie Rollover, when the whole system crashes down and it goes from the, you know, nothing's going to happen, to all of a sudden there it is. He says from the trading floor, everybody put down your phone and listen. We want it all sold. Treasuries, bonds, stocks, currencies, no positions. He says that. Currencies, no positions. Bullion, grab what you can get and pray. And then pandemonium breaks out. So those are some very accurate lines of what would happen in a complete financial meltdown. Now, I don't see it going quite as dramatically as that movie, but I said those dramatic lines to make the point. And it will accelerate. There will be a tipping point. No one knows exactly when. So coming back to your question on silver, quite intriguing and very interesting. So, you know, I've never gotten a letter, a note, a text, an email, or, you know, a drone flying over my house and landing on my front step for saying this many, many times, but Scott Maynard of Guggenheim, Chief Investment Officer at the World Economic Forum, better known in those days as Davos, better known now as the WEF, said in January of 2020, when asked by Bloomberg's financial guys at the World Economic Forum, what's your go-to investment for 2020? And he said silver, and this guy just about lost it. You could see him rock back in his chair. I was playing that more dramatically than he did, but you could see he rocked him back. Silver, why not gold? And Scott said, because gold's pretty near its all-time high, but silver's way off from its all-time high. Mm-hmm. So I talked about the silver market. Well, if you look at what happened in 2020 in the silver market, there was 320 million ounces of silver for investment purposes of silver. Well, what do you mean silver, David? I mean, silver is the silver market, meaning commercial bar form, which is 1,000 ounce bars, which is what sets the price. When you see the silver price, it isn't the price of an eagle or a round or 100 ounce bar or a kilo bar. It's a commercial bar of silver. And some of that is bought for investment purposes. Mm-hmm. When Warren Buffett bought in the early 90s, he bought commercial bar silver. He bought 130 million ounces of it. And all of it, from what we could determine, came off of the COMEX. You're not going to see that happen again. After it scared the bejesus out of the COMEX, they made rules that protect them, not the buyer, but the sellers of physical silver. You can still get silver off the COMEX. I'm not saying you can't. You just can't come in and whack off 130 million ounces. That would wipe out the registered category right now. I mean, we'd have more than a Buffett moment. We'd have, I think, I haven't looked in a while, so forgive me, everybody. I'm giving the idea, not the number. I haven't looked in a couple of weeks. I think it was around 105 million in the registered category. So obviously 130 is bigger than that, which would mean there'd be some deficit from what the registered category, what the dealer inventory of silver actually exists at this point in time. Just a thought experiment. I'm not saying it's going to happen. It can happen. Mm-hmm. The exchange would just send a nasty letter and say, hey, we could settle in cash. Here's your check. Go buy some bonds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. There was a time a couple of months ago here, maybe after the whole Reddit saga and the silver Reddit forums, Andy was talking about having difficulty sourcing the 1,000 ounce bars. Here's an example of the RCM 1,000 ounce bar here. And he was wondering, well, why does it take that long? Usually I can make an order and it's on the truck the next day. So there was a dislocation here this year. It appears to be somewhat back into equilibrium now. What do you make of all of this? Right now we're seeing the mints who are either shut down or on allocation, and some are presuming here that perhaps they're shut down so that the David and the JeanClaudes can buy, but they're leaving the back door to somebody else. What are your thoughts on that, and what can you share with the audience?
I'll be real careful here and step a little gingerly across this path, because one, I don't know is the best answer, but I do know some things and I'll share them with you and your audience. I think it was temporary dislocation. Not that it won't happen in the future. It will. There will be a tipping point. There will be. So I've gotten verifiable data from some of my membership that stood for delivery, and they got a little note from the CME saying, here's your check, reminding them what the contract says. We could settle in cash. So they don't have any recourse. They said, I want delivery. I want these 3 1,000 ounce bars, and they're not exactly 1,000, but you know the deal. Mm-hmm. Want my 3 bars of silver. Mm-hmm. Nope, here's your check instead. And this was not just one data point. This was not numerous ones. My paid membership really isn't that big. It's sufficient for me to make a good living, But the point is, it wasn't just one source. It was several. And then there were places that were getting it, usually bigger entities, and a lot of the swaps between, a JPM and a Scotia, which isn't there anymore, but between these bullion banks, basically those are a lot of times just a paper chase. It's just a bookkeeping entry. Did it physically move? No, probably stayed in the warehouse. They put a different tag on it. So they went to, these pallets here, that pallet, and half of that pallet to right there. That is now take off the JPM tag, put on the Scotia tag. That's how that works. A lot of times. But the point is, there was some problem. It's verifiable. How deep and how wide was it? I don't know. I suspect it wasn't really that big a deal. And we do seem to have come back. And the market changes every day. And I watch it pretty closely. So there was a bit of time going back just a few weeks where silver got sold off heavily in the paper markets. No one was really selling any physical for any, real amount. It's all on short covering. And then it started to pick up these last couple of weeks. So in other words, there was kind of a lull in the market. Everybody stood aside, didn't do anything, held their breath, so to speak. Not much going on other than paper trading. And now the last couple of weeks is starting to pick up again, where the price is coming up because of both short covering and buying, which is what we want. We want a fair market. I mean, why these guys could get away with what they've done for so long is it's against the rules that exist. You're really not supposed to be able to short the amount on these position limits that the exchange just ignores. And I haven't had a lawyer look at it a long time. I've certainly had discussions with people back in the day. I haven't really had any correspondence with the CME directly. I have had indirectly fairly recently, but back when our blonde friend, his name is escaping me, I'm having a senior moment, would answer our emails that Chris Marcus did that interview with. Sorry, folks, I forget his name, but I'm sure most of your viewers know who I'm talking about. But there's clearly problems in all of the markets, let's face it. But if you break down the commodities markets, there's always been a bias toward the short side throughout the sector. Doesn't matter if it's soybean oil, wheat, cotton, whatever. They're all favorable to the shorts. That's the way it's set up. And, if you're going to play in that game, read the rule book. Because if you think you know the rules without reading the rule book, and you think you could take delivery just because you pay in full, you're going to find out the rule book says, no, you have to settle in cash. So.
Oh, I'm drawing the blank to the name too. I'm trying to look for it because I've mentioned it before on my show as well. At any rate, I understand what you're saying here. So, David, we're 42 minutes into this here, and we've been talking at a very high level here. We're talking geopolitics. We're talking about agreements between different countries. We're talking about de-dollarization. We kind of hinted a little bit here at what's going to happen to the guy on the street when we mentioned the real inflation here that is being reported by John Williams at Shadowstat. What do you think is happening now once we get that Nixon moment 2.0? We're 50 years into this temporarily off of the gold standard concept, and we're seeing now that is perhaps already dead. And of course, it wouldn't be a woo-woo show if I didn't have tarot readers here in the last week, and they're all saying that actually it's already dead. We just don't know it yet. Yeah. So something's happened behind the scenes yet, and there's going to be a lag time, just like in 2007 when people were looking at these mortgage-backed securities and saying, hey, hold on a second, this doesn't add up. It's not reflecting the market. It took a little while for people to cover their shorts, as they're doing now. And again, this is what Andy was saying earlier here. A lot of people are covering here, and this criminality that has been allowed to continue is basically subsidizing Dave and I's ability to get physical silver here. So there is a silver lining to all of this. But what's going to happen here to the guy in the street as we look into this, not just this 10% inflation here, but perhaps the hyperinflation that John Williams is warning will be around the corner here in 2022? And what will that mean to our ability to source not just physical gold and silver, but everything we actually need here as opposed to the things we want? Is there going to be this big shift in our thinking here in the very near future?
Yes. Well, it's already happening, as you know, in a lot of places. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the very general into the more specific.
Okay.
So in both a debt liquidating depression or a hyperinflationary depression, remember, I just used the word depression in both cases. And a lot of the, there's similarities across the board. So one, high unemployment. So high unemployment, difficulty finding work, scarcity of goods. So it's hard to find stuff you take for granted at the store. You might have a penchant for a certain brand of Kleenex or something, right? And there's only one brand now instead of 4 brands. And the inflation side, shrinkflation, which we're all familiar with, the price stays the same. So you're skipping peanut butter still. I don't know what it costs. I don't buy much peanut butter, but $3 a jar. It's $3 a jar, but it's 30% smaller in volume. Large uncertainty. So you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring because, you know, your gas station had diesel at it, you know, for your whole time you lived in that neighborhood the last 5 years. The last time you went to fill up your diesel truck, you didn't have it, and they had a sign on the pump saying fuel will be coming, we're not sure when. So there'll be these subtle breakdowns like that will be popping up, and unless you drive a diesel car or truck, you might not even notice it. But people that do will notice it. So you'll see uncertainty, a contraction in goods and services, inability to find work, and a general malaise. That's why they call them depressions, because people start to get worried, concerned, frustrated, and I wouldn't say give up. I'm a very big believer in the human spirit, but some people do. And even in my darker moments, I certainly can. I mean, we all can. So the main difference between a hyperinflation and a deflation is that the money is more valuable in a deflation. And this, I think, will happen even in an inflationary environment, because you're not going to be able to get the wage rates that you got in the 70s, where the Americans were manufacturing, were still probably the productive engine of the world back in the 70s. Right. Now China is the productive engine of the world. So from an Austrian perspective, money isn't really capital. We define capital or wealth as the means of production. When you produce wealth, you're wealthy. So you produce wealth is what? Food, you know, flat screen TVs, you know, building materials, you know, DVDs. That's wealth. Okay. Well, it's all in China, and almost, I won't say almost all of it, but a great deal of it is. We in the US of A do not produce much at all, except pieces of paper with presidents' pictures on them. So, and well, I won't even go there. That would be big hit. But so I think this is
actually have to do an uncensored show at some point. Sorry. Didn't mean to.
The guy on the street's going to be very concerned, and money is going to become more difficult for a lot of them to get, and it's going to be losing value at the same time. So it's the worst of all worlds. They're going to see what we call stagflation, where inflation continues and their money has less and less purchasing power, and it's harder and harder to get that second job or that third job or to sell that car. Right now, you know, there's a lot of easy money, you might call it, selling the second car, which I've encouraged people to do. I say, if you're working from home and, you know, things have been going okay for you, think about it. You know, yeah, it's more convenient if your wife and you both have a car and you've got kids. I get that. But, you know, the way we're going, if you can pull off an extra 10, 15, 20 grand on that car and you've got, you know, a $5,000 credit card bill, that's a really smart financial move. Go to one car, live the inconvenience. Hard times are coming upon us. Suck it up and realize it. Sell that car where it's got a high price on it and use that money wisely. I'll say money instead of currency. So it's going to be tough for almost everybody. And money alone isn't going to save you. And this is probably the most important thing I can say, because, you know, when I was young, I had a misconception about money. I really thought, you know, money could buy you anything, and it can't buy happiness. Best things in life are free, really are true. And I had to learn that kind of the hard way. But back to the point is that it's good to have real money, silver and gold, particularly silver, especially small denominations like 90% coins, like dimes and quarters, because it could be, not would be, in certain situations where if you go to the front of the line and there's, you know, so many paper dollars and you've got silver coins, the merchant might be much more willing to trade you that last couple of quarts of milk for silver than he would Federal Reserve notes. That's just a fact of life, folks. I'm not, oh, you're silver biased. No, I am studied in monetary history, and that's the way people think.
Just look at recently in Venezuela. It's describing exactly what you're just talking about.
Exactly. So thank you for backing me up.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it. Did I explain it well enough? I mean, we could go deeper, but it's, and let me just, and I know we got questions and I'll take them and I'll be here. I don't have to do anything for another hour. So I'll stick with you as long as you want. Okay. After that, I'll probably start getting a headache. But the idea is your attitude. You've got to, and humans are really good at adapting to things. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to have to adapt to a new paradigm where there's less stuff, you make less money, you got to stretch it out. Things are going to cost more, and maybe you're going to have to give stuff up. But maybe we're going to start learning the value of things rather than the price of things. And what I mean by that is, what's the value? The value I have today is that you and I are friends. Mm-hmm. The value that I have today is you and I both have big hearts and we want to help others. That's value. I can't put a price on that. It's priceless to me. Mm-hmm. That's what it means to me. Yeah. So we have to relearn that kind of stuff. We are too mind controlled, I'll use that word, believing that we can get stuff outside of ourselves and make ourselves happy. Oh, if I want to get that car, yeah, then you get that car. And then you learn that isn't it. Mm-hmm. You know, so we're going to have to get a little stronger in our own metal, M-E-T-T-L-E, than the metal we have outside of ourselves. Should you have metal? Absolutely. But if you don't have the means to buy silver or gold, buy more food, get more water, learn a second job, make your hobby into some kind of a money maker, you know, whatever. I mean, it's more important to have extra food than extra silver. I mean, you only want monetary reserves if you've taken care of the basics. So back to you.
Right. No, very good. I appreciate that. And what you're saying too, we've espoused that many times on the show here before. Like, the time is over where humans have to look for that external validation. We are going, again, right here in the center, in the heart space. Again, it has something to do with the energies we're moving into in this age of Aquarius, this age of knowledge, the knowledge bearer. And for that, we need to be informed. We need to be having these conversations. And so, David, I absolutely appreciate you being on here and sharing your wisdom with all of us. Maybe last question here, as we're looking at the physical gold and silver market right now. Again, we talked about Cliff here a couple of times here today, but he's quite on the ball here. He's explaining that this criminality here is subsidizing these prices. How long do these prices continue? And I want to maybe end the show where we started, going back to this Nixon moment, this temporarily going off of the gold standard here 50 years ago. Do you see a moment here? Because going back to Cliff's tweet here, he says the major of the damage will happen between October and November. Do you foresee in the next weeks, months here, perhaps a Nixon moment 2.0, where we go back to a partial reserve, gold reserve currency, where we introduce maybe a new continental dollar? What would that do to prices right now and the availability and the ability to obtain physical silver and gold at that point? Once that announcement is made on that Sunday night show, what happens from there? Do you see that happening here anytime soon, given now the big moves that we're seeing and we've just discussed here on the international scene, where perhaps this old deal is now null and void?
Well, let me say that I can't say it wouldn't happen, but I doubt it, and here's why. Remember, I do my own work. Doesn't make it right, but it does mean I have to own it. So I think what will happen, Jean-Claude and audience, is that we, meaning, well, let me rephrase that, the elite bankers, the arrogance that they have, will try everything that doesn't work first. Which means, as I reported for my paid membership months ago, that Jack Carney, when he was with the Bank of England, said at Jackson Hole, the United Nations, and also the IMF, basically the three power places, that this is what we want, or this is what we want to do. We want an unbacked, so no gold tie, currency system without, or monetary system without currency. So a cashless society, unbacked, that we control, and there's no limit to it. So modern money theory controlled by us, and everything you do is going to be known. So your tax probably at point of sale, and we know what your spending habits are and everything else. That's what they want. Now, just because they want that doesn't mean that's what will happen. Doesn't mean that'll be implemented. So I'm continuing on my train of thought, which means they'll try everything that doesn't work first. So I think we'll get some form of that, Jean-Claude. We'll get some kind of central bank digital currency. The Chinese already have it. You can't buy anything in China with currency. You have to have your phone. I mean, sure, in the remote regions, they probably push paper back and forth. But for the most part, if you're in the mainstream society of China, if you don't have a phone, you can't buy anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way the whole world is moving.
Mm-hmm.
So central bank digital currency, and if it fails or is failing or is not accepted or not adopted, or there's too much black market or too much crypto being used in place of the central bank version, then you could see, with a loss of faith in the new system, and this is pretty much outlined by Jim Sinclair and Bill Holter, is then they will be forced to gain confidence in the system. So confidence doesn't come in their first trial of putting everybody on their digital system. It's rejected by enough where they're worried. So then they have to implement some tie to gold where that will change it. So now I'll take up your second part of your question, which is, when that tie comes into the metals in the new system, what will that mean for the price? And that, or what will that mean for the metals markets? And that's even a tougher question, because you have to look at it in about 2 or 3 ways. You have to look at it as, is it really legitimately tied to gold? Or is it just, what Nixon was doing well, not Nixon specifically, but the administrations leading up to Nixon, pretending that there's an equal dollar to gold ratio when it was a lie.
Mm-hmm.
You have to worry about that. Is it really exchangeable into gold, which I doubt they'd ever allow? So there'll always be some of the gold bug mentality, I'll call it, that will say, well, they're just using gold as a confidence builder. The reality is, how do we know how much gold they've got behind it? That kind of thing. Right. So in that case, they may set a price on gold. They'll say, gold is now 15,000 USD, and the US dollar digital wise has gone from 15,000 an ounce. We're going to drop off a zero. It's now 1,500 an ounce, and we're going to start from there. Who knows? I mean, it could do any one of these things. If there's a true exchange available, and there's like the old Bretton Woods agreement where you could actually exchange it, well, that will be a policeman on the currency or on the digital system, and that would work for a while till they started cheating.
Right.
And that would be the most unlikely to take place, but it could. I wouldn't rule it out entirely, but I doubt it'll happen.
This is where perhaps. Oh, go ahead, David. Didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
If there is a tie to gold, silver will go nuts, because there's an innate wake-up call when there's a tie to gold. All of a sudden, a lot of people that didn't never think about it will awaken to the fact that, well, why did they do that? Then their neighbor will explain it to them in half an hour or less. And they'll go, oh, what about silver? Man, silver's running, you can hardly find it, and I could be wrong on that, of course, but I think it would be. And one of the things I do want to point out, excuse me that I turn away here, I'll give one of the dealers a plug here. I think their backside doesn't have their logo on it, but there's my bag of silver dimes. So you know how much is in that bag? You want to guess? It's hard because we're not used to handling coins. That's $100 right there.
Uh-huh.
So that's 1,000 dimes. Okay. So that's, it's a bag.
Yeah.
That's my barter bag. Okay. Now, how many Federal Reserve notes do you have to give for $100? Think about it. It's $100. I mean, $100 today is hardly anything anymore.
Right.
At least where I live. But that's 3,000 Federal Reserve notes. So every one of those dimes is worth about a $3 bill or $2.80, depends on where you buy it from.
Right.
So that shows you the kind of inflation we've had. And has silver done its job? Yeah, it's done about what gold's done. It's kept about a 9% compounded annual growth rate of 9%. Mm-hmm. I mean, we started, silver was under 5, and now it's at 24 or something. So it's higher in nominal value and in purchasing power. But it hasn't bought you anymore. That bag of silver buys you now what it bought you 10 years ago, kind of thing.
Right.
And we're looking for silver and gold to make up for all of this malfeasance that's taken place by the banking elite, taking advantage of almost everybody on the planet except the top 0.1%, or maybe the top 1%. I don't know. You get the idea.
And not just this malfeasance that they've admitted to, but maybe all this money supply that they've printed that they have yet to admit to. Because when you look at these calculations that you just mentioned, Jim Sinclair and Bill Holter are making at GS Mindset, and I'm a member of that too, and I love their weekly calls. They're saying, yeah, it's very hard to calculate at this point because we don't know how much they've actually printed, and we don't know what's actually at Fort Knox. And that leads us into perhaps more conspiracy theories on whether or not the gold's actually there, what's been done to it, if an audit is coming or not. Again, those are touchy subjects for this YouTube channel here, but we'll follow up on that at some point. But what you mentioned here, I think is important for the audience to understand. It makes sense that these bankers are going to try to kick, scream, hold on to power for as long as they can, and they will try to do basically a human or bankster version of this reset to keep them in power. But I agree. I think it was Jim Sinclair who said that there would probably be eventually 3 resets. This first one would fail, the banker version. Then there would be a first kind of market reset where we would start to see the true value of things, and then maybe another year down the road, the big one there. But when it comes to these bankers trying to tie in gold or silver to our currencies, we have something new now that we didn't have, for the last couple of thousand years, and that's the blockchain technology. And this is where, again, another one of these predictions from the WebBot data might come in, where in fact Veritasium could be, or the concept of Veritasium could be used in the future here to actually tie some of these physical assets to our dollars, where we don't have to trust that their governments are actually doing the audits and all of these things. So we're moving into a new world here, and we don't exactly know how all of this is going to tie in. But one thing is for sure, again, just going back to the example that David was giving here, if you are in Venezuela 10 years ago and you had some silver, you're in a better position in the last couple of years here to manage and to go through the transition that they've gone through than if you didn't have any silver in your possession. So this is not financial advice, of course, guys, but think about where we're all at right now. And again, we've been seeing this for the last number of years, time and time again, where these conspiracy theories become conspiracy fact, right? And so the goal of doing all of these videos is to try to help you manage that cognitive dissonance and that normalcy bias that, David's been at this for years, it never happened. Jean-Claude keeps saying that since 2000, it never happened, so I don't have to do anything. Well, that's the point here, maybe David, and maybe we can end on this. What advice can you give, not financial advice, to your audience, but advice can you give to maybe working through that cognitive dissonance, but really taking action? I think at this point, the whole concept of being your own bank and being self-actualization and being responsible for yourself and your financial situation is much more important than ever in history. Again, not looking for those external saviors, but looking at yourself and what you can do. What can you share with the audience? What do you do, first of all, for yourself to self-actualize and to be responsible for your own finances? And how can we encourage here maybe the people who are just dropping off mainstream news, who just told them last week that gold was a pet rock? How do we tell them to maybe start thinking about making those moves and not being afraid of taking those actions from themselves?
Well, that's a tough one and a very good one to end on. I think the first thing is you got to convince yourself, the old adage over the Oracle of Delphi. What did it say? It said, do thine own self be true. So I'd say educate yourself and try to look at both sides. I do. I still look at the left and the right. I'm probably more libertarian than anything else, and I don't like even that label. But regardless, educate yourself on the truth about money. I'll give it to you. I think it's 4 words. All fiat fails, 3 words. So the truth is all fiat fails. But educate yourself to the point where you believe that. And if you believe what we've been talking about on and off the whole, interface, as well, it never happens. David's been saying this for 40 years and it hasn't happened. Well, it's happening. As I pointed out, gold is compounded and kept pace with its purchasing power for 20 years, and so is silver. So there's that fact. So as the downfall has gone slowly enough for most people to not really pay too much attention to it and get on the troll parade and make fun of the yous and I's and the Cliffs and whoever else that were wrong. Really haven't been that wrong. What we've been wrong about perhaps is the acceleration or the big event to where everybody is shaken to their very foundation saying, oh my God, you mean the ATMs don't work anymore? Or you mean my gas station is closing? Or, you know, I can't go to the bank for 4 weeks? Or the bank's going to open and I'm only allowed to get $300 a month out of the ATM? Or any of these things that have taken place already. I'm not making it up like, oh, these are things that put out there. This is what has happened. Argentina is famous for all the money that you have in your bank is still yours. You can only get 300 pesos a week out of the ATM.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I have to have 5,000 to live.
Sucks that's to be you.
Problem. Your money's still there. You just can't access it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to belabor the point. It's to educate yourself is number one, and two is take action. Look, the word satisfaction, you know, the old Rolling Stones, I can't get no satisfaction. You want to be satisfied in life. I mean, most of us are not megalomaniacs. We're not billionaire bankers where we can never get enough. We're solid people where we need enough. We want to enjoy what we have, and that makes us happy. But you want that security. And in a world that is so insecure, not only from a financial basis, but a food supply basis, a quality of food basis. I mean, I have to digress just another moment or two, but, you know, I mean, I remember going into the store with my mom as a kid, you know, none of the apples were the same size. None of the oranges were the same size. You know, the colors were different. You know, this was organic stuff back in those days. Now, every orange is identical size and color. Every apple's the same shape. I mean, it's like perfect. It's almost like plastic, but there's no nutrition in it.
Yeah.
It's all GMO. They're all programmed to grow a certain way with a certain color and ripen at a certain time and on and on. So sorry, I just had to throw that in there. But the idea is, yeah, be true to yourself, learn, educate. And once you have satisfied yourself, not to 100%, I'm absolutely sure, but to a strong enough position where you can take action, then take action. Get food, get water, be content, look at where you can live within your means. If you're not, see what you can do to help others. Go deeper, look at, I'd say become more spiritual, depends, you know, I'm talking about a broad base, and this is my take. You asked me my thoughts, so I'll give them to you.
Yeah.
You take that moment to realize whether or not you believe in God or not, at least you can think of a higher power or he or it that presides over us all.
Mm-hmm.
And take a moment to reflect on the blessings we do have. And also grateful. I mean, I had a life coach for a while. I'm not afraid to admit that. I've always tried to be the best I can be. And certainly I'm only human. No matter how good you become, you never rise above human being. And I keep that in mind. And when they ask me who I am, a lot of times I say I'm 1 out of 7 billion. Who are you? But anyway, back on point. Yeah, live within your means. And then if you've got the wherewithal to save, I would save in silver first because it's more of a barterable commodity than gold is. Mm-hmm. And if you need to stack a lot of wealth and you have it, good for you, then sure, buy some gold too. I think you should have them both if you have the means to do so. But don't rely on it as being the thing that's going to save you. What's going to save you is your home, basically your own community is what's going to save you. Your skill set, your open heart, your ability to learn and teach. And that's what's going to be. And there's this movie, I can't remember the name of it. I give it to you, JeanClaude, so people could watch it. Sorry, I can't recall, but it basically shows the shift and the collapse. And it's not really as bad as we might imagine, you and I might imagine. And it happens, and it's there. And no one could deny it anymore. And, you know, we could say we're right, but why would we bother wasting our breath? We told you so. It's there. Why state the obvious?
Yeah.
But we go back to a more agrarian culture, a slower pace of life, a lot less traveling by automobile. And basically, as I said, we use the word, I love big words, agrarian just means you farm. You know, you have your own vegetable garden. Yeah. And you eat better and you slow down. And you basically get more in tune with, as I said earlier, the creation or the creator that made the creation, and you find out what's valuable there. I mean, what's the most valuable thing on the planet? I said oil several times, but if you really want the truth, it's soil. The most valuable thing on the planet is rich soil. Now, who talks about that? Now, I don't think anyone you've interviewed is probably giving you that indication on one of your programs, but that's the truth. You know, that's the black gold. Is rich soil. But anyway, I could go on and on. Is there any last minute? I watched some of the comments, and thank you for all the heartfelt, nice words toward me. I appreciate it. I couldn't read them all as I'm looking at the camera, but someone asked about my thoughts on price for silver at the end of the year. I'll play the game. I still think we will be able to get above $28 an ounce. I do think November. I think that we could see something happen around the September 11th time frame. It's a 20-year anniversary, so it could be 3 days before, 3 days after, or on.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe, maybe not. October is always the scariest month of the year. We could see a stock market problem in October, and we could see a political infighting about raising the budget for the United States. So I do think by November we may see something like a cyber attack that we've already seen those already. The oil one and the meat packing plant. But another one or two significantly. I think you're going to see pressure on oil prices for a variety of reasons. So I do think Cliff's right. By November, I think there's going to be enough of a shift in everybody that's paying attention that, we're kind of going into that next step of a downturn that can't be denied if you have eyes to see. And then I think the metals reflect that in a significant enough way where silver's back above 30, and that's a big milestone for this year. And then going into 2021, you want to hold on to your hat because it's only going to get more and more interesting. And I'll stick to my number, 2022. I'll fudge a little to 2023. I think by that time, so we're talking not that long, where it's going to be pretty obvious to almost everybody that not only what we already know, that we're never going back to normal, but that the new normal is a lot more of a change than most people at this point in time suspect. And I do have to add one more thing that just came in from wherever. This character, Klaus Schwab, he made this comment, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers already saw it.
You'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
Well, that one, but the one that really is more scary to me is the one that he said that if there were a cyber attack, it would make the COVID look like a small inconvenience. So, they already had their cyber polygon. Nothing really happened. They did their test. They've done it in the past. But be prepared. I'm looking for oh my moment. Could be an EMP, could be something EMP-wise natural or man-made. Could be cyber attack. It could be both together. But I think we're going to see something along those lines before the end of the year. So happy note to end on. Remember, we are spiritual beings in a human experience. Our heart is more important than anything we have. And having stuff doesn't, delivery person just came. You can hear my dog. She's quite aggressive. Sorry, folks. So that's it.
Okay, very good. Folks, so a couple of things here before we leave. David, if you guys are interested in some physical silver, this is the promotion from Miles Franklin here, our affiliate program for this week. Andy will be on the show here in about 20 minutes for our 3 o'clock Thursday Precious Metals weekly review. And in the meantime, as we're talking about educating yourself, David, tell the audience here what they can find on the subscription service here at the Morgan Report, and let them know also where to get the book, what's going on with the deliveries here, if we can still ship them to the UK, because I know a lot of people in the chat were asking about this during our last show. So these last two things here, how can we find this educational value here of the silver guru here at themorganreport.com? What's in store for the audience here?
You bet. So just go to themorganreport.com. Make sure you get on our free newsletter first. If you want to subscribe, just hit the subscribe tab. There's a video and there's a big long sales letter. You can read all of it. It's pretty much a good overview of everything that you get. for a paid subscription. Of course, we do have a money back guarantee if it's not for you. And for some people, if you're not really a stock trader, it's probably not for you. Now, I do have people that don't have stock accounts, but that's rare. They want my insights no matter what. But most people, they do it for the equity side. We look at all the resource sector, not just silver and gold, but right now that's primarily. We've done really good with uranium. Uranium's on a run. We have put cryptos in there. We called Ethereum probably at the best part to get into it. It's really skyrocketing for us. I prefer Ethereum over Bitcoin. I won't go into the whys. As far as the book goes, there's a book tab. Just pull that down. We do ship everywhere but the UK. We've just had too many problems with the customs. Sorry, if you are in the UK and you want a physical copy of the book, the best thing I can think of off the top of my head is to find somebody that you know in the States or somebody you know in an adjacent country that could reship it to you. But the costs are nuts. And then the last few that we did came back to us, and we actually lose money shipping to the UK, which I'm willing to do. It's just a few bucks, and people want it, I'll give it to them. But it just become impossible. So the only other thing I can think of, if I, this whole situation unravels a bit where we have more of a normal environment, which I doubt, but I'm able to fly wherever I want unencumbered. I could bring, several with me to the UK, but I just don't have any other way around it,
Okay. Well, there you go, folks. If you want to inform yourself so you can empower yourself and take action here, that was the theme of this show here today. And this is why we're going back 50 years on this petrodollar agreement and what perhaps it means now that this agreement has been supplanted or at least rescinded here by the Saudis. Much, much more to come. And of course, tomorrow, Rob Kirby will be on the line as well for the next installment of the death of the petrodollar. So we'll have his take on that. In the meantime, please do go and subscribe here to the Morgan Report on YouTube, where you can find a lot of his free and educational videos here on YouTube. And of course, you can find him at the morganreport.com is his website. So thank you so much to the Silver Guru. David, thank you so much for being here. And of course, folks, that was episode number 3 of Death of the Petrodollar with David Morgan. So we'll see you soon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Au revoir.